The day began like any other for Elias Ward, a quiet rancher who lived far out in the dry Arizona territory. He woke before sunrise, fed his horses, checked the fences, and prepared to ride across the far end of his land. The summer heat was already rising, and the long day promised to be like many before it. He didn't expect anything unusual. Life on the ranch rarely changed. But that morning, he felt a strange pull toward the western ridge, the part of his property he didn't visit often. Maybe it was instinct or simple chance, but he decided to ride that way and check the water lines and old cattle trails. Elias rode his horse, Dusty, at an easy pace. The land stretched quiet and wide around him, dry earth, scattered shrubs, and distant mountains that looked blue under the rising sun. He liked the silence. It gave him space to think. But halfway across the open land, he noticed something odd far ahead. At first, it looked like dark shapes swaying from the branches of an old mesquite tree near the rocky ridge. Elias slowed his horse. The shapes didn't look like cattle or equipment. They didn't even look like anything he recognized. A cold feeling ran through him. Something about the movement was wrong. Too slow. Too heavy. He rode closer. Dusty's hooves crunching on dry soil. When he was close enough to see clearly, he stopped so suddenly that Dusty snorted in surprise. Elias stared in disbelief. The shapes were not objects. They were people, 6 young girls hanging by their wrists from strong branches. Their feet touched the ground, but their arms were bound high above them, holding the weight of their tired bodies. The ropes looked tight, but the girls were alive. Their eyes were open, though faint and unfocused, and their bodies trembled with exhaustion. Elias felt his heart pounding. He kept his distance for a moment so he would not frighten them. He raised both hands to show he meant no harm and slowly stepped forward. "It's all right," he said softly. "I'm here to help." The girls didn't speak. They watched him with cautious eyes, too weak even to cry. Elias immediately took out his pocket knife and moved to the first girl. She looked no older than 13. Her wrists were tied with thick rope that had dug into her skin from long hours of being held up. Elias gently cut the rope. She collapsed softly, almost weightless, and he caught her before she hit the ground. He lowered her gently, letting her rest on her knees, and gave her water from his canteen. He moved quickly from one girl to the next, cutting each rope with careful hands. He spoke softly each time, trying to reassure them even though they barely understood English. He helped each girl sit, drink water, and breathe normally again. They huddled together once free, supporting each other silently like a small, frightened group of sisters. Elias looked around the area, trying to understand what had happened. There were no signs of struggle, no tracks strong enough to identify anyone, and no abandoned supplies that might explain why the girls had been left in such a state. Whoever brought them here had vanished long before Elias arrived. The sun was stronger now, and he knew that if he had come even an hour later, the heat might have done terrible harm to the girls. He felt a knot in his chest when he thought about how close they had been to danger. He knelt beside them and offered more water. One of the girls, slightly older than the others, reached out hesitantly. She seemed to be their leader, or at least the one who had the most strength left. As she drank, Elias noticed a small tattoo on her upper arm. It was a circular symbol with 4 small marks around it. He didn't want to stare, but the symbol caught his eye. It wasn't a decorative mark. It looked like something cultural, something meaningful. Then he noticed all 6 girls had the same tattoo in the exact same place. The older girl saw him looking. She quickly covered her arm with her other hand as if protecting something important. Elias lifted his hand gently to show he wasn't asking questions. But now he understood that these girls were not simply lost or abandoned. They were connected by something significant, something someone might have wanted to erase or harm. The older girl began to speak softly, mixing Apache words with the few English words she knew. Elias understood only fragments. He recognized Mountain, taken, and hide. She pointed toward a distant ridge as she spoke. He followed her gaze and saw nothing but dry land and rocks. Yet her trembling made it clear that something or someone had frightened them deeply. Elias took a deep breath. He was a rancher, not a lawman or soldier. He didn't know who had done this, or why. But he knew one thing with full certainty. Leaving the girls here was not an option. They needed shelter, rest, and safety. He stood and offered his hands to help them rise. They were unsteady on their feet, but they trusted his support. He led them to Dusty, his horse, and helped all 6 girls climb onto the saddle. They were light and still weak, so he walked beside the horse to support them. The journey back to his ranch would take time, but he moved slowly to avoid tiring them further. As they traveled, the girls remained silent, except for soft breaths and quiet sighs of relief whenever the wind cooled their faces. Elias tried to talk to them gently, telling them they were safe now. He wasn't sure how much they understood, but they seemed calmer when he spoke. Once in a while, the oldest girl looked back over her shoulder toward the mountains, her eyes full of fear. Elias noticed and followed her gaze, but he saw only open land and distant shadows. Still, he sensed danger in her behavior. Something or someone was still out there. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had begun its descent. The sky was orange, and long shadows stretched across the land. Elias's ranch was small but strong, with a sturdy wooden house and a warm barn. Mason, Elias's hired hand, stepped out when he heard the horse approaching. He froze in shock when he saw 6 Apache girls on the saddle. "What on earth happened?" Mason asked, staring at them. "I found them," Elias answered quietly. "We can't leave them out there." Mason understood immediately. He wasn't the kind of man to question Elias's heart, though he knew this decision could bring trouble. The territory wasn't always kind to Apache people, and helping them could anger certain folks. But Mason also knew Elias had a strong moral compass. If these girls needed help, Elias would be the first man to offer it. The girls were brought inside the house. Elias guided them to sit near the fireplace, where the warmth would help their cold, tense bodies relax. He offered them blankets and a simple meal: bread, broth, and warm tea. The girls ate little but drank gratefully, keeping close to each other. Using the small Apache English word list he owned, Elias tried to ask simple questions. He pointed to the tattoo and asked gently, "What does this mean?" The oldest girl touched her tattoo lightly and then shook her head, signaling that she could not explain fully. But she pointed again toward the ridge outside, repeating the same Apache word softly, a word that sounded like hunters, or the ones who chase. Elias felt a heavy realization settle in his chest. These girls were not simply lost. They had been targeted. Someone had brought them far from their home and left them helpless, and those same people might still be nearby. The thought made him glance out the window. The sky was almost fully dark now. It was quiet, too quiet. The oldest girl shuffled closer and gently took his hand. Her hand trembled. She looked at him with soft, desperate eyes and whispered, "Help, please." Elias felt something shift inside him. A silent promise formed in his heart, one he didn't say aloud because he didn't need to. He nodded once. Slowly. "You're safe here," he told her. That night, he stayed awake longer than usual. The girls, wrapped in blankets, slept softly on the living room floor. Mason covered the windows, just in case. Elias sat in a chair by the door, watching the night sky through a small crack in the curtain. He remembered the symbol tattooed on the girls' arms and the fear in their eyes when they looked toward the mountains. He didn't know everything yet, but he knew enough. These girls carried something important. Something someone wanted to destroy or control. And now, whether he planned it or not, he had become part of their story. Elias took a slow breath and whispered to himself, "Whatever comes next, I won't let anything happen to them. The night grew darker. The ranch fell quiet. But deep inside, Elias felt a storm approaching, one he would have to face, because 6 frightened girls now depended on him more than anyone else in the world. Next morning came slowly, with soft sunlight slipping through the curtains. Elias had barely slept. He stayed awake most of the night, watching over the 6 Apache girls resting by the fireplace. Their breathing had grown steadier as the hours passed. But even in sleep they held on to each other, as if afraid that being separated would bring danger again. Elias understood their fear, even though he didn't know the full story yet. When he stood up from the chair, the old wooden floor creaked lightly. One of the girls woke and blinked in confusion before recognizing him. Her shoulders relaxed, and she pulled the blanket closer around herself. Elias smiled gently and whispered, "You're safe. It's morning." He started the fire again and warmed a pot of water for tea. Mason entered the room, wiping sleep from his eyes. He looked at the girls, and then at Elias. "You think whoever tied them up might still be around?" Mason asked quietly. "I don't know," Elias answered. "But something about this doesn't feel finished." They prepared a simple breakfast bread, boiled oats, and warm tea. The girls ate slowly, still tired from the day before. Elias noticed that the older girl kept glancing toward the window, checking the outside world as if expecting something to appear. Her caution made him uneasy. After breakfast, Elias brought out his small Apache English word book again. He knelt on the floor in front of the girls, so he wouldn't tower over them. He opened the book and pointed at simple words: name, danger, home, mountain. The girls tried to respond, mixing soft Apache words with the few English words they knew. Bit by bit, Elias began to understand their situation. They were not ordinary girls from a small village. They were apprentices chosen to learn sacred knowledge from their tribe's healers. The matching tattoos were marks of responsibility, not decoration. They weren't just symbols, they showed their important path in the tribe. It became clear that someone had taken them far from home, someone who didn't understand or respect Apache customs. The oldest girl gently traced her tattoo with her finger, her eyes dark with memory. She pressed her palm against the floor and spoke quietly. Elias tried to understand, and with the help of the word book, he pieced together her meaning. They had been taken from the mountains by a group of outsiders. She didn't know their names, but she used a word Elias recognized from stories: outlaws. He felt a weight settle in his chest. Outlaws were unpredictable. Some wanted money, others wanted control, and a few wanted power through fear. If these men had taken the girls, there had to be a strong reason behind it. The oldest girl drew shapes on the wooden floor with soft movements of her finger. She drew a jagged line that looked like a mountain with 2 peaks. Elias leaned in. He recognized that mountain. It wasn't far from the ridge where he found them. Then, she marked an X on one side of the drawing. "That's where they were taken from," Elias murmured. The girl nodded weakly. Then she drew another symbol, a rough circle with 4 marks. She pointed at her tattoo, and then at the circle she drew. Elias realized the tattoos were not only marks of identity, but part of something much bigger. He didn't fully understand, but he had a strong feeling the girls held knowledge that others wanted to exploit. As they communicated, the younger girls watched quietly. They seemed to rely on the older girl to speak for them. Their trust in her was clear, and their trust in Elias was slowly growing. When a sudden breeze shook the window frame, the youngest girl flinched and grabbed her sister's hand. Elias gently reassured her with a soft smile. After the conversation, Elias stepped outside to get fresh air and think. Mason followed him. They stood on the porch, the land spread open before them. "What do you make of all this?" Mason asked. "They were taken by outlaws," Elias said. "I don't know why, but those tattoos mean something important." Mason crossed his arms. "Helping them could drag us into trouble. You know, I'm already in it, Elias replied. I couldn't leave them. Mason let out a slow breath. I figured you'd say that. Elias appreciated that Mason didn't argue further. They had worked together for years, and Mason knew that Elias would never abandon anyone in danger. Later in the afternoon, Elias checked on the water supply outside. The heat was stronger now, making the air shimmer above the ground. He took a moment to scan the land. Everything looked peaceful at first glance, but then he noticed something unusual: fresh horse tracks near the edge of his property. They weren't his or Mason's. The hoofprints were deep and pointed in different directions, like riders had been circling the area. Elias crouched down and gently brushed the dirt around the tracks. The marks were recent, maybe a couple of hours old. He went inside immediately. The girls sensed his seriousness. They watched him carefully as he closed the door and checked the windows. We might have riders nearby, he whispered to Mason. Mason tensed. Are they Apache? No, Elias said. The tracks are too heavy. These are big horses. Outlaw horses. The older girl seemed to understand the word outlaw. She sat up quickly, fear flashing across her face. Elias held up a calming hand. You're safe here, he said gently. But we need to be careful. The sun began to lower behind the hills, and the ranch was wrapped in long shadows. Elias prepared lamps, but kept them dim. He didn't want to draw attention. The girls stayed close together near the fireplace, whispering softly in their own language. Their expressions were thoughtful and worried, as if they were trying to decide what they should do next. As darkness fell, Dusty Elias's horse snorted nervously outside. Elias stepped silently to the window and gently moved the curtain. His breath caught. 3 riders were moving slowly across the property line. They weren't coming toward the house, but they were close enough to see the buildings. Their clothing didn't belong to ranchers or travelers. Elias recognized the style: wide hats, rough coats, and the way they sat on their horses, as if searching for something. The oldest girl came up behind Elias quietly. She stood on her toes to see out the window, then gasped softly when she recognized the silhouettes. She grabbed Elias's sleeve, her hand trembling lightly. He moved the curtain back into place and knelt beside her. The girl shook her head and pointed at her tattoo again. She pressed her hand against her heart, then pointed toward the riders. Elias realized what she was trying to say. They weren't searching for anyone, they were searching for them. Mason stood near the fireplace, gripping a tool in his hand for comfort. He wasn't looking to fight, but he was ready to defend the house if needed. The riders finally moved away, disappearing into the distant darkness. But the fear they left behind remained heavy in the room. When Elias sat back down in his chair, the oldest girl walked over to him. She held something small in her hand, a carved stone bead with markings. She hesitated before placing it gently in his palm. Elias studied it. It was smooth, carefully shaped, clearly important. What is it? He asked softly. She pointed at the bead, then at Elias, then pressed her hand over her heart. Her meaning was simple and clear: protection, gratitude, trust. Elias felt humbled. He closed his fingers around the bead and nodded slowly. You're safe, he said. I'll make sure of it. As the girls settled for the night, Elias and Mason talked quietly. They're going to come back, Mason said. I know, Elias answered. What do we do? We keep the girls safe. But we can't stay here. This ranch is too open. We need to move them somewhere hidden. Where? Mason asked. Elias thought for a long moment. Then he remembered an old cabin in a canyon miles away. A place with narrow entrances and natural cover. The canyon cabin, he said. They won't find them there. It was a risky plan. Moving 6 frightened girls through rough terrain wouldn't be easy, but staying put was more dangerous. Elias looked at the bead in his hand again, feeling its weight. He looked toward the girls, sleeping quietly. Their lives were no longer drifting in danger, they were now tied to him. depending on his strength, his choices, his protection. He made his decision firmly. Tomorrow, before sunrise, they would leave for the canyon. Outside, the night grew deeper. The riders were gone, but not far. Elias could sense it. The danger was still out there, waiting. But so was hope. And for the first time since he found the girls, Elias felt a growing resolve in his heart. He wouldn't let anything happen to them. Not now. Not ever. Before the first light of dawn touched the sky, Elias was already awake. He moved quietly through the ranch house, checking supplies and preparing everything they would need for the journey ahead. The 6 Apache girls were still asleep, their small forms curled beneath the blankets near the fireplace. He looked at them and felt a mixture of responsibility and quiet determination. They trusted him completely, and he could not fail them. Mason entered the room, rubbing his eyes. "We leaving soon?" he whispered. "As soon as the sun rises," Elias replied. "We need the morning light. But we can't waste time." Mason nodded, understanding the urgency without needing more explanation. The riders they had seen last night were searching for the girls. Elias didn't want to be there when the men decided to come closer. When the girls woke, Elias greeted them with a warm smile to calm their early fear. He offered a simple breakfast, although they ate little. Their eyes carried the weight of a long journey and even longer memories. The oldest girl understood what was happening the fastest. When Elias pointed at the door, and then to the horizon, she knew they needed to move. She gathered the others, speaking softly to reassure them. Elias led them outside. The early air was cool, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of dry grass. The sky was painted with shades of soft orange, announcing that the sun was close. Elias helped the girls climb into the wagon he had prepared. He placed blankets inside, along with water and food. The girls huddled together for comfort as the wagon creaked under their weight. Dusty, the loyal horse, stood steady and calm as Elias attached the reins. Mason mounted another horse to ride behind them. Everything was ready. "We'll take the long way," Elias said. "Less chance of being followed." He guided Dusty forward, and the wagon began to roll slowly across the open land. The journey to the canyon cabin would take most of the day, maybe longer if they needed breaks. The land was wide, and the path was uneven, but Elias chose a route that avoided clear trails. The fewer tracks they left behind, the safer the girls would be. At first, the girls were quiet. They watched the land with wide, cautious eyes, unsure of what dangers might appear. Elias tried to lighten their fear by teaching them simple English words. He pointed at the sky and said, "Sunday." Then he pointed at the earth and said, "Ground." The girls repeated the words softly, their voices gentle and shy. In return, the oldest girl taught him small Apache words. She pointed at the wind and said, "Tu." Elias smiled and repeated it, and the girls giggled quietly when he mispronounced it. The moment was small but powerful. For the first time since he found them, the girls' laughter warmed the morning air. As they traveled farther, the land became rougher. Rocks scattered across the ground, and the path narrowed. Elias kept alert, scanning the horizon for dust clouds that might signal riders behind them. But the world remained still, only the sound of wooden wheels crunching over dry soil and the soft breaths of the girls filling the air. Around midday, Elias stopped near a cluster of tall rocks to let the girls rest and stretch their legs. He passed them water and small pieces of bread. The older girl took the bread and divided it evenly among the younger ones. Elias watched her with admiration. She was barely older than the others, yet she carried herself with the strength of someone who had learned to guide and protect. While they rested, Elias walked a short distance away to observe the horizon. Mason joined him. "You see anything?" Mason asked. "Not yet," Elias replied, "but we can't assume we're safe." Mason nodded. Those riders didn't come all the way out here for nothing. They'll try again. Elias lowered his voice. We need to get the girls to that cabin before nightfall. He turned around to check on them. The girls were sitting together, sharing a blanket like sisters. But then, the oldest girl stood up and walked toward Elias. She pointed to the ground beneath her feet, then closed her eyes. She placed her hand on the earth, pressing her palm lightly into the dirt. Elias watched her curiously. After a few silent moments, the girl opened her eyes, worry etched in her expression. She looked up at Elias and whispered a single word he didn't understand. She repeated it softly, pointing behind them. Mason frowned. What's she saying? The girl tried again, mixing the word with English. Coming, she whispered. Elias felt the words hit him harder than he expected. He looked back at the horizon. Nothing visible yet, but he trusted her instinct. She and the other girls had lived close to nature their entire lives. They understood signs he couldn't see. He helped them back into the wagon. They continued on the rough path with more urgency. Dusty pulled faster, sensing the tension around him. The girls watched the horizon anxiously, their fingers gripping the edge of the wagon. A few hours later, the land began to change. The canyon entrance appeared as a narrow opening between tall stone walls. It looked like a hidden doorway carved into the land. Elias breathed a small sigh of relief. They were close. But just before they entered the canyon, Elias heard a sharp sound behind them, a distant crack, like a branch snapping under weight. He glanced back. For a moment, there was silence. Then another sound echoed across the land, this time closer. The older girl clutched Elias's sleeve. Her eyes widened. She nodded urgently toward the canyon, urging him forward. He guided Dusty faster, pulling the wagon through the narrow entrance. The high stone walls surrounded them on both sides, offering shade and protection. The air cooled slightly, and the girls exhaled with relief. The canyon was quiet, peaceful even, with tall cliffs guarding them like protective arms. Halfway through the canyon, they reached the old cabin Elias had mentioned. The small wooden structure sat against the rock wall, hidden behind bushes and stones. It had once been a hunter's shelter, but now it would serve as a temporary refuge. Elias helped the girls down from the wagon and led them inside. The cabin was simple: 2 beds, a wooden table, and a fireplace that hadn't been used in years. Dusty waited outside, grazing quietly. The girls explored the space slowly, their eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The youngest girl touched the wooden wall, and for the first time since Elias met her, she looked genuinely calm. But the peace did not last long. As Elias stepped outside to check the area, he noticed something on the ground: fresh tracks. Hoofprints. The canyon had narrow entrances, which made it easy to track movement. Someone had been nearby recently. We don't have much time, Elias said quietly to Mason. They're close. As the sun lowered behind the canyon walls, the air grew cooler. Shadows stretched across the ground. Elias and Mason worked together to hide the wagon behind boulders and scatter dust to cover any clear tracks leading to the cabin. They moved quietly and quickly, aware that the girls were watching anxiously through the cabin's small window. Just as Elias finished covering the last trail, he heard a faint echo. His heart jolted. It was a sound he recognized, not a bird or an animal. It was human. A distant voice bouncing off the canyon walls. The older girl stepped outside and stood beside him, her hand trembling slightly. She did not need to speak. Elias understood. The riders had followed them into the canyon. He guided her gently back into the cabin and whispered, "Stay together. Don't come out unless I call for you." Mason stayed near the cliff wall, his eyes sharp and alert. Elias positioned himself near the entrance of the cabin, listening to the canyon's quiet echoes. The voices grew clearer. There were at least 2 men, maybe 3. They were scanning the area, their footsteps crunching on gravel. Elias stayed silent, praying they would pass by, without noticing the hidden cabin. The girls held each other tightly inside. The oldest girl kept her hand over her tattoo, as if the mark carried strength. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the voices faded into the distance. The canyon swallowed the sounds, leaving only silence behind. Elias let out a slow breath. "We're safe for tonight," he whispered. Inside the cabin, the girls relaxed, though their fear still sat quietly in their eyes. Elias reassured them with gentle words, calming their minds as best as he could. They were safe for now. But he knew the riders were close, too close, and they would return. As night settled deeply into the canyon, Elias sat near the cabin door. The carved stone bead the oldest girl had given him hung around his neck. He held it gently, feeling its smooth surface in his hand. He wondered how far these outlaws were willing to go. He wondered what the tattoos truly meant, and why the girls had been taken. But above all, he knew one thing. He would not abandon them. No matter how much danger approached, he would stand between it and the 6 frightened girls who now depended on him. The canyon was quiet, the stars beginning to appear above. Elias stayed awake long into the night, listening for footsteps, listening for danger, listening for anything that could help him understand what was coming next. The real fight had not yet begun, but Elias was ready. The night inside the canyon felt different from any night Elias had experienced before. The air was cooler, the silence deeper, and every sound echoed gently between the tall stone walls. Elias sat just outside the cabin, watching the stars slowly appear through the narrow opening above. The girls were inside, sleeping close together for warmth and comfort. Mason rested in the corner, though his sleep was light and uneasy. Elias didn't blame him. They both knew the riders were somewhere out there, searching. Elias held the small, carved bead the oldest girl had given him earlier. Its smooth surface warmed slightly in his hand. He didn't know all of its meaning, but he understood it represented trust and hope. It reminded him why he was doing all of this. He could have walked away that first day, told himself the girls were someone else's problem, but he hadn't, and now he felt deeply connected to their safety. As the night grew colder, Elias stepped inside the cabin to check on the girls. The dim firelight made their faces soft and calm. They slept peacefully now, far different from the trembling fear they carried when he first cut them down from the tree. The oldest girl opened her eyes a little when she heard him come in. She didn't speak, she simply looked at him, saw that he was still there, and closed her eyes again, with trust. That moment strengthened Elias more than any weapon ever could. When dawn arrived, the sunlight didn't reach the canyon floor easily. It appeared slowly, rising high above before touching the stone walls. Elias stretched his arms and took a slow breath. Today would be important. They needed to find the Apache tribe. Only the tribe could protect the girls and explain the meaning of their tattooed symbols. The outlaws might return, and if they found them first, the girls would be in danger once more. The girls woke early. Though tired, they seemed calmer in the canyon than they had been at the ranch. The youngest girl even smiled softly when Elias passed her a cup of warm water. Elias felt relief seeing that small smile. It meant hope. The older girl walked to him and pointed at her tattoo. Then she pointed deeper into the canyon, toward a faint path winding between the stones. Elias tried to understand, but she could see he was confused. She motioned for the other girls to gather. One by one, each girl showed her tattoo. The symbols appeared identical at first glance, but the oldest girl touched each one with careful fingers, showing Elias where the small marks differed slightly in pattern. They weren't just symbols. Together, they formed a map. With slow movements, she knelt on the cabin floor and drew in the dust. She drew 6 small marks, each representing the tattoo of one girl. When Elias looked closely, he realized the shape matched the mountain outline she had drawn on his ranch floor before. The lines connected, forming a path. The path led to a place deep in the mountains, likely the home of someone important to their tribe. Elias felt a spark of understanding. "This is where we need to go," he murmured. The girl nodded. Mason leaned over and studied the drawing. "That's a long journey," he said. "Rough land. But it's hidden enough. Those men won't follow us far if we take the narrow paths." Elias agreed. The outlaws didn't know the land as well as he did. The canyon had secret trails that could hide them from sight. The route might be difficult, but it was safer than waiting for danger to find them. They packed the essentials: water, bread, blankets. Elias lifted each girl into the wagon again, making sure they were comfortable. The oldest girl insisted on walking part of the way, pointing to the drawing she made. She wanted to guide them using the knowledge she had learned during her training as a healer's apprentice. As they started deeper into the canyon, the walls grew taller and closer together. Sunlight touched only the highest rocks, leaving the path cool and shaded. The wagon wheels rolled slowly over the uneven ground, and Dusty moved carefully, sensing the tense air around him. For a long while, the journey was quiet. Only the sound of the wagon and the soft rustling of blankets filled the space. Elias checked behind them every few minutes, but no riders entered the canyon. The girls stayed close together, watching the world with alert but calmer eyes. Hours passed as they traveled deeper. The canyon began to open into a high mountain trail. The air grew colder, and the land changed from desert dryness to rocky paths and small patches of green. Mason tied his coat around one of the younger girls to keep her warm. Elias followed the oldest girl's directions carefully. She pointed to certain rocks, certain turns, and sometimes placed her hand on the ground to sense vibrations. It was something Elias had never seen before. Her connection to the land seemed almost instinctive. He respected it deeply. As afternoon approached, Elias heard a faint echo behind them. A familiar shiver ran through his spine. He stopped the wagon and listened. Mason held his breath. There it was again, distant, but not distant enough. The sound of horses. The girls tensed. The oldest girl's eyes grew wide with fear, but she quickly motioned for everyone to continue. She pointed to a narrow opening between two heavy rocks, a path Elias had never noticed before. "We go?" he asked. She nodded hard. "Safe," she whispered. Without hesitation, Elias guided Dusty into the hidden passage. The wagon barely fit, and Elias had to push the wheels over a bend in the rock. Mason helped from behind. It was difficult, but the narrow passage concealed them perfectly. From inside, they could see the canyon without being seen. The sound of the riders grew louder. Elias placed a finger over his lips to keep the girls quiet. They all held their breath. 2 riders appeared on the main path. They scanned the canyon closely, searching for tracks or signs. The girls huddled behind Elias, holding each other's hands tightly but silently. The riders stayed for a long moment, their eyes sweeping the land. Elias could feel the tension in the air. It felt heavy, pressing on everyone. Finally, the riders turned their horses and moved away. Their figures grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared around a bend. The girls released their breath at once, their shoulders lowering in relief. The older girl touched Elias's hand lightly. It was her way of thanking him for trusting her direction. Elias felt grateful to her too. Her knowledge had saved them. They continued through the narrow passage until the path opened into a wide valley surrounded by tall mountains. The valley was quiet and beautiful, with tall pines and clear water flowing through small streams. It felt peaceful, almost untouched by the harsh world outside. The girls recognized the place immediately. Their eyes lit up, and they whispered excitedly to each other. Elias didn't understand their words, but he understood their joy. This valley was home. After following the stream for a short distance, they reached a hidden Apache encampment. The camp was set deep within the trees, invisible from the outside. When the elders saw 6 young girls arriving with a rancher, Their expressions changed from shock to profound emotion. The oldest girl rushed forward and was embraced by an elderly Apache woman dressed in traditional clothing. The woman whispered something into the girl's ear, and the girl began to cry softly, not out of sadness, but relief. Other elders gathered, touching the girl's tattoos and murmuring prayers. They understood immediately what had happened. They understood the danger the girls had escaped, and the knowledge they carried. One of the elders stepped forward and approached Elias. He studied the rancher quietly, his eyes deep and wise. Then he took Elias's hand and placed something inside it, a small beaded token. It was made with careful patterns and colors. The elder spoke gently in broken English. "You bring our daughters home. You protect them. For this, our hearts thank you." Elias bowed his head respectfully. "I'm glad they are safe," he said simply. The girls gathered around him one last time. The oldest girl looked up at him with warm eyes. She touched her tattoo, then touched his chest gently over his heart. "You save us," she whispered. "You see us. You care." Elias felt emotion rise in his throat. He nodded, unable to find words that matched the depth of the moment. As he and Mason prepared to leave, the girls waved softly, their eyes full of gratitude. The mountains shielded the valley, the elders protected the girls, and the danger behind them slowly disappeared from sight. Elias rode away knowing his life had changed. He had not gained money or reward, but he had gained something deeper: respect, connection, and the knowledge that he had helped protect a future that was bigger than himself. Whenever he touched the beaded token hanging from his saddle, he remembered the 6 girls he had found hanging in fear, and how trust, courage, and kindness carried them all the way home. Their story stayed with him forever,